Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today I am here with the next update for my Big Fat Eyeshadow project. This is a project that I'm doing this year just to get to know my eyeshadow collection a bit better, especially my palettes, because I've had this feeling over the last couple months that I used to have too many eyeshadows and I want to kind of get to know them. And a lot of the palettes that I have as well, I've used them a lot, but usually used like one shade at a time and not as a whole. So I don't actually really know how I feel about a lot of the palettes and the color stories and everything like that. I just kind of know how I like specific individual shades, but not the palettes themselves. So I wanted to create this project, and the main part of the project is just to use my eyeshadow palette collection, like I said. Each month I pick 4 palettes. 3 of them is hand-picked and 1 of them is my Project Level Up palette. So I go through those, and each like kind of week out of the month I use that palette as like a 1 week on palette, and I have to do at least 3 exclusive looks with that palette. And then if I feel like reaching for it in other looks, I do that too. But mainly I use the palettes for those 3 looks. So that's the main structure for the biggest chunk of this video. And I'm going to obviously go through all of the palettes that I am working on right now or have been working on in the month of May. I do also have 2 more parts of this project. First up, we have my eyeshadow bank, which was inspired by Lara Force. Where I basically collect points in order to buy eyeshadows. So I'm on a very strict eyeshadow low buy as well, so I'll cover that. And then lastly, we have Expand Those Pans, which was created by Dora. And in that project, you choose some pans, like a product you already have hit pan on, and your goal is just to expand those pans. So within those 4 palettes that I've chosen for the month, if I have pans on any of those palettes, I pick one of the pans per palette to use 5 times each, and that's how I'm incorporating that project. But with that long intro being over, I'm going to jump straight into the video. But before I do so, if you're new here, please consider subscribing. I would love to have you in the family. Let's jump into the video. So I'm going to start off with the eyeshadow bank part of this video. So let me talk you through the points that I've earned. So this project, like I said, was created by Lara Force, and I'm very heavily inspired by her. I'm doing my project almost the same, where you can earn points in different ways. And for every 10 points that you earn, you can buy 1 eyeshadow, and that's kind of like the main gist of that project. So the different ways that I can earn points is using a palette no pan left behind, like obviously the first time in the year that I do that, so I can only earn 1 point per palette there. I have, for every 10 uses, I earn 1 point as well. And then for every 100 uses in the same eyeshadow, I earn 5 points. I also have pans, so every time I hit pan, I earn 1 point. And then every time I finish an eyeshadow, I also get 5 points. So that's the ways I can earn points, and let me go through what I've earned in the past month. So let's start off with a no pan left behind. I have 4 palettes in the past month that I have hit no pan left behind on. We have Odin's Eye Merry Christmas, which is my Project Level Up palette at the moment, which is also in this project. I have my Huda Beauty Nude Light Obsessions, which is also in this project for the past month. Same with the Huda Beauty Mercury Retrograde palette, that is also one of my May palettes. And then the last palette that I hit no pan left behind on is the Odin's Eye Hey Reindeer palette, which was in my Big Fat Eyeshadow project in April, and I didn't quite reach for all of the shades, so I reached for the remaining shades this past month. And with all of that, I earned 4 points in that category. When it comes to 10 uses, I earned 16 points in this category in May. I'm starting off with a couple of my Panda palette shade, which is a soft glam palette. And I used the shade Rose Pink 20 times in the past month for a total of 30. I reached for Glistening 40 times in the past month for a total of 50. And the reason why it's so high is because I actually have some Franken uses that came into action in that past month, which was a big chunk. I also have Tempera, which I used 30 times for a total of 100. So that's a spoiler for the 100 uses category. And then also in that palette, we have the shade Orange Soda, which I used 10 times in the month of May for a total of 30. I also have Burnt Orange, which I used 10 times as well for a total of 40 in the year. And those are all of the shades for my Panda palette. Then I have the shade Rosewood from Burberry, which is in my Yellow Project pan. And I reached for that one 20 times in the past month for a total of 140 uses, which is really, really good for this year. That's my most used eyeshadow by far this year. Then I also have a couple more. We have the Stila Magnificent Metal in Metallic Peach. Used that one 10 times for a total of 20. I have the Glam Shop Turbo Mielka, which is also in my Yellow Project pan. I reached for that one as well 10 times for a total of 40. And by the way, when I say 10 times or whatever, it might not be 10 times in the specific month. It's just that I hit that like 10 uses threshold in the past month, if that makes sense. And then lastly, we have the Shine by SC single in the shade Ice Blink, which I also used 10 times for a total of 10 times this year. So those are the 16 points that I earned in that category. I'm really, really pleased with that. 16 points is really good for that. So let's move on to the next one, which is 100 uses. And I've kind of already covered that one because I actually was able to reach for my shade Tempera from my Soft Glam palette 100 times this past month, which was amazing. So I got 100 points there, and it is the second eyeshadow this year that I've hit 100 uses on. It's this one and then that Rosewood shade from Burberry, which I talked about earlier. Then the next category is pans, and in the past month I got 5 points from pans. I actually only hit 4 points or 4 pans, but I'm going to talk you through them because I actually have 1 point that I forgot to include in last month's update, and that was the shade Evergreen from that For Sight palette. That was my product level up before the Merry Christmas palette. And yeah, I forgot to include that in my last month's points, so I added into this month even though I hit that pan in April. Then for pans that I actually hit this month, I have the shade Nectarine from the Pastel Roses. We also have the shade Burnt Orange from my Soft Glam palette. Again, that's my palette. We have the shade Joy from Rose Quartz. That's a Huda Beauty palette. And then I have the shade Bowley from the Carly Bible palette from Anastasia. And those are the pans that I hit, so 5 points in total there. Then the last category, we have finished eyeshadow. And again, I actually have 1 finished eyeshadow this past month, which is one that I've talked about a lot in this video. And that is Tempera, again from Soft Glam. I actually finished this one on exactly 100 uses. So I was able to hit both that 100 threshold as well as finished eyeshadow on the same day, which was amazing. And since I get 5 points from finishing an eyeshadow, I got 10 points that day just from finishing that, which is really, really good. And that is all of the points that I earned. I'm really happy. I did pretty good this month. I'm really, really pleased with all the points that I got. And if you have been adding up, you would know that I got a total of 35 points in the month of May, which again I'm really pleased with. And before that I was standing at negative 60 points. And just to kind of give you a little explanation of my point system as well, like how I can spend them. I cannot spend any points before I have earned them, so I can't go into the negative with anything that I'm buying myself. That is just something that I put in since the start of the year. However, if I'm gifted something, either like gift or PR or anything like gift for purchase or like a gift for a friend, anything like that, I am allowed to go negative for that, but I can't purchase anything myself to go negative, if that makes sense. So I was, like I said, negative 60, and that is because I have been digging myself out of the hole from receiving the Hella palette from Odin's Eye, which I was really gratefully sent by one of my subscribers. I'm so, so grateful for that. But I've been trying to get my points up since then. And like I said, I was at negative 60 last month. I was actually negative 50, but I did get a free gift with purchase from Cleona, which was 1 eyeshadow, which put me back down to 60. But with those 35 points added, that means I'm only at negative 25 now, which I'm super happy with. And that means that hopefully in the month of June, I should be able to get to the positives again. I'm foreseeing myself to get more than 25 points in June. So I will finally be in the positives after months and months of trying to like get back to that like positive amount. So yeah, that is my kind of like beauty budget eyeshadow bank segment of this video. Again, I'm really happy with this past month. I'm pleased with how it's going. But yeah, I'm going to wrap up that part now and move on to the palettes. I'm going to do that and I'm going to talk you through the Expandos pans while I talk about the palettes that I have pans. So we have the 4 palettes right here that I was working on in the past month. We have 2 Huda Beauty palettes, 1 Colourpop palette and 1 Odin's Eye palette. And we're going to start off with my product level up palette, which is the Odin's Eye palette. I'm going to run some footage now of what this palette looks like, as well as the swatches. It's a really, really nice color story. It has 2 green rows, and then it has some more kind of warm toned, some more neutral in shades, but also some more brighter, like reddish tones at the bottom 2 rows. It's a typical like red and green color story for Christmas, and this is the Merry Christmas palette. but it actually does have a lot of shades that work nicely for spring. I do think there's a lot of shades in here that can work all year round, which is good because it's a very versatile palette that way. It just happened to be released as a Christmas themed palette. But that is what the palette looks like. I'm going to jump straight into the first looks because these videos always end up being really, really long. So I'm going to start with look number 1. So you can see look number 1 right here. This was actually a palette bingo that I did. And I started off with the black shade Happy Ending on my outer corner. And I blended it out with the shade Hot Cocoa, which is a really deep reddish brown. And I put that in my outer crease as a blend, as well as slightly into my crease overall. And I just blended that out a lot because I didn't have any light transition shades for that palette bingo. So I just really blended that out in the crease. For my lid, I took the shade Elf Witch, which is the first shade in the palette, which is a green to kind of orange multichrome. It's really, really pretty. And I put that, like I said, all over my lid. And then I put the shade Bless, which is the pink in the palette, on my lower lash line. And then lastly, I put the shade Snowman on my inner corner, which is a really, really stunning shade. I love that one a lot. And that was look number 1. For look number 2, I ended up going into the greens in this palette. And I started off with the shade New Leaf, which is more of a kind of cool tone green on my outer corner and outer crease, as well as on my outer lower lash line. So like all of kind of the outer areas of my eye look, I used this shade. Then I went in with the warmer kind of green on the second row, Best Wish, into my inner crease, used to kind of give that contrast of warm and cool greens. And then I felt like I wanted a bit more depth, so I took the shade Christmas Tree on my outer corner just to deepen up that kind of cool tone area of the look. After that, I moved into shimmers, and I put the shade New Year all over my lid, which is a really, really stunning shade. And then I left like the inner lid kind of blank, and I went in with Snowman again, which is the 5th shade in the palette, first one on the second row. And I put that on my inner lid, as well as inner corner and my inner lower lash line. So like all of that kind of inner area, I put that shade. And then lastly, I put the shade Matcha Cookies, which is a really beautiful kind of swamp green shade. I love these type of greens. And I put that on the center of my lower lash line. And that was that second look. Then for the final look I did with this palette, I tried to do something a bit more neutral. So I started off with the shade Hot Cocoa again on my outer corner, which is that really deep reddish brown. And I put the shade Gingerbread, which is the kind of mid-tone orange transition shade, on my crease, as well as on my lower lash line. After that, I moved into the shimmers, and I put the shade Jingle Bells on the center of my lid, which is the gold on the top row. And then I took the shade Santa Star, which is the gold from the bottom row, into my inner lid. For my inner corner, I took the shade Snowman again. This has been my go-to inner corner shade for this palette, and I really like that one again, like I said. And then very lastly, I put the shade Happy Ending as a liner, and again, that is the black in the palette. And that was my third and final look with this palette, which again I was trying to do a bit more neutral, and I really like how this one turned out again. It was definitely quite gold leaning, so it was still a bit more intense, but it's the most neutral look that I could kind of think of to create with this palette, unless I went in like really lightly with just like the crease shade and one of the shimmers tapped on top of the lid. I still wanted to make like a full look, and I'm really happy with how it turned out, even if it was quite intense. So I'm not going to show you what the palette looks like right now because again, it is my product level up palette and I don't want to give any spoilers. But this was a brand new palette when I introduced this one to that project. I hadn't used it at all. So obviously I didn't have any pans for Expand Those Pans. And that means that I am done. We're kind of talking about this palette and we can move on to the ratings. So if you're new to this project, I do have a rating kind of system for my palettes to determine how I like them. And I have 4 different categories. First up, we have color story, then we have versatility, we have quality, and then personal ranking. And let me go through what I said about this palette. So for color story, I gave it a 4. I said I really enjoyed this color story. It's very unique and has lots of qualities that I love. I don't have a specific reason for giving it a 4 instead of a 5. I just think back at other color stories that I have worked with, and I like some of them better, and I also feel like they're a bit more unique than this one. But I still think this one is really, really amazing, which is why I gave it a 4. For versatility, I gave it a 5. I said this palette has tons and tons of variety to it. You got light, ethereal shades, you got deep, smoky shades, you have warm tones, you have cool tones, and there's a lot of different colorful shades as well as some more neutral shadows too. So you can create a really big variety of looks, and there was definitely like a lot more looks that I had in like my mind that I wanted to do with this palette. that I didn't get to include in these 3 looks. So I'm really, really happy with that. And I also said that there's loads of variety in texture between the shimmers too, which even further builds on that versatility. So yeah, a 5 in that category. For quality, I gave it a 5 again, and I said I love, love, love the quality of this palette. The mattes blend beautifully and the shimmers are sparkly and just up my alley. There's a few shimmers that aren't as textured, but they still perform really nicely, and I appreciate the variety again. So 5 for quality. Then for the last ranking, which is personal ranking, I gave it a 4, and I said I love this palette, but I wouldn't say it's an absolute favorite. It's definitely a beautiful palette, and don't get me wrong, it's going absolutely nowhere. But I can't give it a perfect score here, as I know that I've had palettes that I personally rank slightly higher. So with all of that being said, this palette ended up scoring 18 out of 20 points, which is really, really good. And that is this palette right here. So let's move on to the second one. And the second palette that I worked on is the Huda Beauty Mercury Retrograde palette, which looks like this. So it's a really beautiful color story with lots of different type of shades. Yeah, it just has a lot of kind of mauvey and rosy kind of mattes, but it also has some kind of peachy tones, some purpley tones, some blues. And yeah, it's just a lot of things going on in this palette. And it's a cool classic. A lot of people love this palette a lot. And yeah, this is what it looks like. You can see the overview, the swatches, all of that kind of stuff. But let's move on to the looks. So we're starting off with this look right here, which I wanted to do a bit more of a colorful look. I started off with the shade Hot Mess on my outer corner, as well as like lower outer kind of lash line. And yeah, this one is like a reddish, mauvey, kind of deep shade. It's really, really nice. I like this type of shade a lot. Then I took the shade Off Balance in my outer crease and blend, which is like a lighter version of that shade. Then for my inner crease, I took the shade Haze, which is the turquoise in the palette, turquoise matte. And then for the center of my lid, I went in with the shade Mercury, which is the turquoise shimmer. It's like a turquoise to kind of blue purple shimmer. It's like a duochrome, it's quite nice. And then on my inner corner as well as in the lid, I went in with the shade Supermoon, which is like the white kind of shade in the palette, but it has like a pink to blue shift in it. It's not like a super strong multichrome or anything, but it does have that kind of slight shift to it. And then lastly for that look, I went in with the shade Libra on the center of my lower lash line, and that is the first look complete. Then for day 2, we have this look right here where I went in with the shade Crash on my crease as well as lower lash line. And this is like the most neutral matte in the palette. I then went in with the mix between Crash and Vortex on kind of my outer corner because I didn't want it to be too deep. So I kind of mixed Crash into Vortex, which is the deepest shade in the palette, and put that on my outer corner. Then for all of my lid, I went in with the shade Galaxy, which is a really, really stunning kind of taupey, neutral, slightly rosy shade. It's on the second row. Really love that shade. And then for my inner corner, I went in with the shade Cosmic, which is the first shade in the palette, which is like kind of light pink shade. And that is the second look, which is more of a neutral kind of everyday look. For day 3, I wanted to do more of a kind of warm tone look with this palette. So I started off with the shade Utopia on my crease as well as lower lash line, which is that bright coral kind of peachy shade on the first row. And then to deepen that up, I went in with the shade Karma on my lower crease as well as my outer corner. Just to deepen that up, it's like a slightly deeper version of that shade, and it's on the third row of the palette. Then for shimmers, I went in with the shade Frazzled all over my lid, which is the last shade in the palette, which is kind of like a gold shade with some green sparkles to it. And then I took the shade Gold Glitch, which is also a gold, but it's more kind of yellowy leaning, and it's also a bit more textured. And I put that on the inner lid. And then lastly, for that look, I took the shade Supermoon on my inner corner, which is that kind of white iridescent shade again. And that was the last look for this palette. So this is what the palette looks like now. And I was actually able to use majority of the shades in my looks. There's a handful that I didn't do, including kind of these 2 shades right here. I know for sure that I didn't use, and there was a couple more. But the ones that I didn't use in this palette, I did actually end up using in like these other looks throughout the month, which meant that I did complete No Pan Left Behind on this one. And then for my Expandos pans, because of course you can see that I have a couple pans in this palette, I actually handpicked my shades this time. Normally I randomized them, but if I'm being honest, my phone died last time filming because it took so long to film that video that my phone ran out of battery. So I just had to handpick because I didn't have time to charge it. And the shade that I picked was the shade Supermoon right here, which is is it Supermoon? No, so Supernova. Supernova right here, which is one of my favorite shades in the palette. It's like a pink to gold iridescent, and it's actually one that I didn't use, I think, in the looks. And comparing it to the before picture from the overview you had in the beginning, you might be able to see that the pan has expanded quite a lot. And it's because I was able to reach for it 5 times. So I was able to hit my goal for expand those pans. And I'm really, really happy to see that pan expanding. It's funny because you can kind of see inside of this pan that there's like a little like dot and then also like a ring. So I think that the pan isn't like completely flat, which is interesting because I didn't know that. And I can't really see it in any of the pans that I've hit. I mean, I only have one more pan. But yeah, very interesting. And I haven't seen that in a Huda Beauty palette before. But I'm happy that I was able to hit my goal on this palette. And again, that means that this palette is done. Before I do anything else, I'm going to talk you through all of the uses, just to let you know how much I reached for them. And I reached for all of the shades in here once, apart from Supernova, which I reached for 5 times, of course. And then this shade here, which was Supermoon, and I reached for that one 2 times. So that is my uses for this palette. So let me also go through the ratings of this palette. So for color story, I gave it a 4, and I said, this is a well-loved color story for a reason. And when it came out, it was very revolutionary, I think. Whereas now I see these type of palettes quite often. However, this is one that still sticks out as one of the more unique color stories. And I think Huda did a great job with this palette, which is why I gave it a 4. For versatility, I gave it a 4, and I said there's a lot of versatility in this palette. There are obviously a lot of pinky toned shades, but also more peach, neutral, gold, and some purples and greens also. This means that this palette has lots of different looks to offer. However, a lot of the mattes lean more pink tone on the eyes, which I feel like is a trend with Huda Beauty, and it breaks off the versatility a little bit, so I couldn't give it a 5, so only 4 there. For quality, I gave it a 5. I said there's absolutely nothing wrong with the quality in this palette. The mattes are creamy and blendable, and the shimmers are sparkly and dimensional. There's also a difference in textures as well, which is always nice. So 5 there. And then for personal ranking, I gave it a 3. I said despite this palette ranking very high in most categories, like all of the other categories, I've always said that this is a palette that I've never really felt connected to. I know it's a favorite for many, but I just feel like it's never been one of mine. I also said that I feel similar about this even after using it in the project, which is why I gave it a 3, because, you know, I didn't fall a lot more in love with this palette. Again, I see the kind of beauty in it now, and I can see how it ranks high in a lot of categories. But personally, I need to be honest, my personal ranking is only a 3. I can't give it more than that. So that is the Huda Beauty Mercury Retrograde palette. And we're going to go from one Huda Beauty palette to another. We have the Nude Light Obsessions next, which looks like this. It's very much like a pink tone palette again. This is definitely a trend for Huda Beauty. A lot of her palettes are pink tone. This is 1 out of 3 that was released. They did the Nude Obsessions Light. They did the Medium and Rich. And I only have the light. This is a color story that I really like. I love these rosy tones, and I really just fell in love with this color story seeing it online. I love like the warm rosy tones that are in here, as well as the purples. They're kind of like the warmer leaning on the kind of when it comes to like rosy shades, which is what I like. So that is what the palette looks like. It's only 9 shades, and let me talk you through the looks. So this is a little bit boring because they don't have any shade names. So I'm just going to refer to the number, and we're going to start off with look number 1, where I started off with the 5th shade, which is the center shade of the palette, just to set down my brow bone. And then I went in with a 3rd shade in the palette in my crease, which is the light pink. Then for my outer corner, I went in with the 1st shade in the palette, which is like a mauve tone. It's more of a cool tone mauve. Then after that, I moved into shimmers, and I took the 7th shade in the palette, which is the first one on this last row, and I put that on the outer and middle lid. And then for the very inner lid, I took the 6th shade in the palette, and I put that just in that area as well as in my corner, and that was that first look. I wanted to go for something lighter, kind of more towards the pink tones in this palette, which is what I did. I stuck to the pinks in here. Then for day 2, we started off with the 8th shade in the palette in my crease, as well as on my lower lash line, which is the more kind of neutral transition shade. Then I took the 9th shade, which is the deepest shade in the palette, on my outer corner. After that, I moved on to the shimmers, and I took the 4th shade in the palette, which is more of a neutral kind of pink shimmer, and I put that on my outer lid. And then on my inner lid and inner corner, I went in with that 6th shade again, which is that kind of pink to gold duochrome, and that was like the whole look. So that was the second look, and we're going to move on to the third and final look for this palette, which is a very, very simple one. I only used 3 shades. So start off with the first shade in the palette, which is the mauve tone shade again. I put that on my crease as well as lower lash line, just all over the crease and lower lash line. Then I took the shade, the second shade in the palette, all over my lid, which is the purple. And I put that, like I said, all over the lid. And just to kind of brighten up my inner corner, I took the shade, the 6th shade in the palette, which is again that kind of pink to gold duochrome. And I put that on my inner corner as well as inner low lash line. And that was the third and final look. So that's everything that I did with this palette. 3 quite simple looks. But yeah, I'm going to talk you through obviously the versatility and stuff in a second. But it's not much depth to this palette, which is why a lot of them just turned out very kind of ethereal. When it comes to my focus shade in this palette, you might have already been able to guess it. I have 3 pans in here, but the ones that I selected is this 6th shade right here, which was that kind of pink to gold duochrome. And I did use this one in every single look, so 3 uses there. And I was actually able to use it 2 more times outside of that for my total of 5. So I was able to again hit my goal with this one. It's definitely expanded a little bit, but I've also lowered down like the kind of pan around it, or like the dip around it. So I'm really, really happy again with the movement. And also when it comes to my uses here, I used that first shade twice. I used this one once, 2 times the center shade. I used this one 5 times, and then the 3 shades on the bottom row I used once each, and that is the uses. Let me move on to the ranking of this palette, and I'll tell you what I gave this one. So for color story, I gave it a 4, and I said for me this is really like a perfect color story, as I love these types of warm pinks and romantic tones. I know it's not perfect for everyone, but I really do like it. And yeah, it's a really nice one. Again, this is kind of what drew me into this palette. For versatility, I gave it a 3. I said you can make some good variety of rosy looks, but there's not that much depth, which hinders versatility a lot. I also said you, of course, also always get looks that are in that romantic kind of realm due to the color story. So, you know, it's not the most versatile in that sense, but you can get a lot of versatility within those rosy tones, which is why I still gave it a 3, which, you know, is still a bit high. Maybe I should give it a 2, but I feel like there is a lot of versatility within this palette, especially only for 9 shades. So I'm sticking with 3 for that ranking. Also, by the way, a little side note, if you can hear lots of crunching and steps, that is my little doggy eating her lunch. Actually, it's her breakfast, but she's eating it quite late. It's almost like dinner time for her. She's just haven't eaten it. So strange animal, but yeah, if you hear that, sorry. So the next ranking is quality, and I gave this one a 4, and I said the quality is good. The mattes are blendable, but doesn't build a lot. The shimmers are fine, but nothing's like too special. So it's like a middle of the road palette for me. However, I do like this formula more than a lot of others. So I'm still going to give it a 4, even though it's like nothing too special, because I feel like the mattes are like, they do have that blendability to them, even though they don't build. But I do also think that's kind of like just the depth of the palette, and that's kind of also why they don't build very much. So 4 for that category. Then for person ranking, I actually gave this one a 3, which is quite surprising to me. I said I like this color story and it's good for effortless looks. However, I was also quite happy to move on from this one at the end of the week, and again, which is surprising to me. I said I do like this palette a lot, but it's not as much of a favorite as I thought it would be. So 3 in that category. And if you sum all of that up, this one scored in at 14 out of 20 points. Perfect timing as always, my darling. The final palette that I have to talk about is this palette right here, which is the Colourpop Sweet Talk palette. This one looks like this, and it's definitely more of a kind of peachy, coral kind of color story. It's not quite a monochromatic palette. It's obviously not, you know, advertised that or anything, but it has quite a monochromatic like undertone to it. Just to know as well, I have 2 shades that I switched out of this palette, which is a shade Prima Drama and Early Morning. I have switched those out because they were originally pressed glitters, but I have switched them out to regular shimmer shades that are basically the same type of tone, but just regular shimmers, so just be aware of that. But again, let me go into look number 1. So for look number one, I started off with the deepest shade in the palette, Feel Free, and I put that on my outer corner, and then I used the shade ICYMI, in case you missed it, to blend that out, just blend out the outer corner. Then I moved on to the shade Meadow into my crease, as well as putting that one on my lower lash line. And then for my lid, I decided to go in with the shade Melody, which is the shimmer on the third row. And then to brighten everything up, I took the shade Side to Side, which is a really, really beautiful sparkly shade. And I put that on my inner lid and like kind of up into the crease a little bit. And for my inner corner, I used the shade Prima Drama just to brighten that up, because I feel like Side to Side has a little bit more of a base than I would like. So I used to use that shade on my very inner corner to brighten it up a bit. And that was look number one. For look number two, I wanted to work with the kind of more neutral tones in this palette, and I actually ended up doing more of a wing look, which I really, really like. It looks like this, and I started off with the shade Work It, and I put that into my crease, kind of as like, just regular crease shade. And also to note that I did put some tape down just to keep that kind of wing shape out when I made this look. So I only took it out to as far as the tape went. Then to kind of make it a little bit deeper, I took the shade West Side just in my lower crease, just to deepen it up a tiny bit, because it's slightly deeper than the shade Work It. And then I ended up putting the shade Catch Me, just to blend everything out. That is the first shade in the palette, also the lightest matte, just to again make that quite effortlessly and not like too deep. Then to finish everything up with the matte, I took the shade Feel Free, which is again that deepest shade, and I used it as a liner with the help of the tape. And it created this really, really nice like wing out shape. And I like doing this one as a trick, just to get like a winged eyeliner kind of with shadow. And then to top that look off, I used the shade Side to Side again, just topped all over my lid. And again, it gives this most beautiful sparkle. I really love the shade a lot. It's probably my favorite Colourpop shade of all time. But yeah, that was the second look. For the third and final look is actually the look that I'm wearing today. So I'm going to scooch in closer while I read out what I've done. So for this look, I took the shade ICYMI on my outer and inner corner, just to start off like this halo effect that I have today. And then to blend that out, I took the shade Meadow, just to kind of blend this that shade out on both areas. And I went back and forth between those shades a little bit. Then I also took Meadow, by the way, on my lower lash line, the outer lower lash line. Then to just blend everything, I put the shade Dream Maker into my crease, which is the more kind of pinkier matte. So I put that one into my crease, and that was it for the mattes. For shimmers, I took the shade Garden Date, and I kind of put that one like on like this area and this area. So like the kind of, not quite the center of the lid, well, center of the lid, but like leaving the very center bare, just to help again with that halo effect. And then for the very center of my lid, I took the shade Early Morning, which is that gold, and I put that one, just in the center of my lid. And I also used that one on the center of my lower lash line. And then lastly, for this look, I took the shade Side to Side again, and I put that one on like my inner corner. And I topped that with Prima Drama on the very, very inner corner, just to brighten it up again. And again, this is the final look. So yeah, I really like how this look turned out. I like this halo effect. I don't always like how halo effects turn out on me, but I do quite like how this one turned out. So before I talk about the uses in this palette, I'm going to talk you through my Expandos pans, and you might again have been able to guess it, but the one that I said to go with is my favorite shade in the palette, Side to Side, which I really, really love. And I was again able to reach for it 5 times. I believe again I reached for this one in every single look. Yeah, I did. I reached for it in the 3 looks, and then 2 more times on top of that for those 5 uses. And again, I think this pan has expanded, and also like the dip around the pan is also deeper. So really, really pleased with that. For the uses of this palette, I used the shade Catch Me once. We have 5 times, once. For the second row, we have 2 times, 2 times, and then we have once each for these. For the last row, I used this one twice and this one twice, and then these 2 in the center once each. And that is the uses for this palette. Okay, so I'm going to do the last ranking for this one right here before we introduce the new palettes. And for color story, I gave this one a 3, and I said this is a beautiful color story when it comes to peach and corals. However, it's quite monochromatic and not the most creative color story, which is why it ran like rates in the middle. For versatility, I gave it a 2. I said there's really not much variety in this palette. Yes, you can get some different looks, but they're all going to lean very peach and coral like this. I mean, the neutral look is kind of, I think, the furthest I can get away from that, and that's why I wanted to do something like that with that kind of wing shape. I went very, very light on the matte, and I stuck to the more kind of slightly orange leaning ones. But yeah, again, not too much variety. For quality, I gave it a 3. I said this palette has pretty standard Colourpop quality. It is good, but it's not the best. The mattes are fine and most shimmers are pretty standard. However, the shade Side to Side is beautiful. It's so sparkly and it's one of my favorite Colourpop shades ever. Again, probably even my favorite ever. So I'm super happy that it's in this palette. Then for personal ranking, I gave this one a 4. I said, so I actually really love this palette still. When I first pulled it out, I wasn't sure how I was going to like it, but the more I used it, the more I liked the looks. Yes, it's more of a monochromatic palette, but the tones in this palette are stunning, and I do love this palette for what it is, so 4 there. And again, with all of that being added up, this palette ranked in at 12 out of 20 points. So that is everything that I have been working on over the past month. I'm going to quickly go into the palettes I'm going to introduce for next month because I know this video is going to be super long as always. So I'm going to just introduce the next month's palettes. So the first palette that I'm going to introduce is this one right here. And this one is from Kaleidos and it's the Sashimi City palette. So this is a really, really beautiful kind of neutral palette. I'm actually going to insert the swatches and everything instead. This is a really beautiful kind of neutral palette. It's definitely kind of has some more camely and peachy undertones, but I really, really love this palette a lot. It has been in my product level up, which is why I have 4 palettes in it. I think I had 1 pan from my Pandas eyeshadows and 3 from my product level up. But yeah, I really love this palette a lot. It's super beautiful and I'm excited to work on it. Before I show you the next palette, we of course have to pick Expando's pan shade. So I'm going to go ahead and go 1 to 4, which is the amount of pans that I have. And we're going to start with this one being number 1 and this one being number 4. So let's see which one I get. So we have 1 to 4 and we got 3. Okay, yeah, I'll take that. It's not the best one. It is one of the mattes, but it is this shade right here, which, yeah, I'm going to work on this one 5 times. I would have hoped for one of the shimmers, but I'll take this one. So this shade here, which I actually can't remember what it's called. It's not Penthouse. I think Penthouse is this one, Pink Ginger. I have the slip somewhere, but I can insert it on the screen what it's called. But yeah, that is going to be my focus shade for Expando's pans to use 5 times. Then the second palette that I'm going to work on is actually one of my Pat McGrath palettes. And this is the Bronze Seduction palette. Again, it looks like this. It is super stunning. This is a very kind of smoky palette, but it has a lot of variety to it too. I'm excited to see like what kind of looks I can do with this one, how many like neutral looks I can do, as well as like really smoky, intense looks. It is a 10-pan palette, but I think it's going to be a lot of variety with this one. And I also have some of my absolute favorite special shades. So I'm excited to play around with this one. And for this palette, I don't have any pans, so no pans for Expando's pans. So let's move on to the third palette. And for the third palette, we have a Natasha Denona palette. This one is the Sendo palette, which in a way, some of this palette, like this side here, is not too dissimilar from what I'm wearing. So I'm going to be excited to play around with this one to see how it compares to the Colourpop palette. But yeah, again, this palette has like some peachy tones inside of it, which I think, again, might be quite similar to the Colourpop one, and I'm going to see how they compare with the looks that I make. But it also has some more kind of blue turquoise shades, which is quite interesting. So I'm excited again to see what looks I can create with this one and like how versatile they can end up being. But yeah, that is the third palette, and again, no pans in this one, so nothing for Expando's pans. Then, normally, like I said in the beginning of this video, I do have my product level up palette as my 4th palette, but I don't think I'm going to be able to roll out my product level up palette for the next update. So I have picked a 4th palette to work on, and the 4th I have picked is the Aha Honey palette from Colourpop, which is also going to be my focus this month. So this one looks like this. It is a monochromatic palette. It's important to note that I have actually changed out one of the shades, which is the shade Sunburst, which used to be a shimmer, but I just felt like the formula had gone off, so I switched out with a matte. So yeah, that is just the only difference. Otherwise, this is the original palette. Yeah, it's obviously like a monochromatic palette, but I'm excited again to see how much variety I can actually get out of it and the looks I can create with it. Overall, I love yellow looks, especially in summer, so it's going to be fun to reach for this one. And with this palette, I have a lot of pans. We have 4 pans, again, similar to the Kaleidos palette. We have 1, 2, 3, 4. So again, I'm going to go ahead and randomize between 1 and 4. Only I can get my phone. And we'll see what palette I can get. So I've already have like parental reroll this selected. Okay, so 4, I think I know what shade that is, and I think I'm quite happy with that. Yeah, so I'm quite happy with that shade. Actually, it's one of my favorites in this palette. It is a matte again though, which is going to be difficult, but this one right here, which is the shade Buzzkill, is going to be my focus. And with that, I think that's going to be it for this video. I think I've talked about everything that I wanted. Yeah, I'm really happy with where this project is going, how I'm ranking my palettes. It is a lot of work, for sure. Like reaching for every palette, like, you know, 3 looks 1 palette, is a lot of work, but I'm really enjoying it. I'm really enjoying getting to know my palettes and just having an excuse to reach for them in any capacity I want. Obviously, when I make those 3 looks, I don't have to like focus on like hitting pan or anything. And the only focus I really have is my expand those pans. But even then, I feel like I can have a lot of freedom with the looks that I create. So it's super fun. I am thinking about next month, because we're going to be at the halfway point of the year, kind of going through the summary of this first 6 months of like how the ranking is done, because I have been like drafting up a list of how my palettes have been ranking throughout the year so far, from obviously top to bottom, and I'm going to go through all of that at the end of the year. But I think I might do a halfway point update. Is that something that you guys would be interested in seeing? Just like how all of the palettes are ranking? If so, let me know, and I'll be happy to do that after the next update, just kind of at the halfway point of the year. But again, I'm going to wrap up the video here. I've been filming for like, I have about 50 minutes worth of footage. I've been filming for probably an hour. So I'm going to wrap it up here. I really hope you have enjoyed this video. And if you did, please go ahead and give it a thumbs up. And I will catch you in my next one. Bye guys.